The mating ceremony was supposed to be the beginning of everything. Instead, it became the moment Marin's world shattered into pieces too small to ever fit back together. She stood in the great hall of Silver Peak Palace, her hands pressed against the soft fabric of her borrowed gown, deep emerald velvet that had once belonged to her sister. Everything Marin owned had once belonged to Celine first, but the life growing inside her belly that was hers. 3 months along, just beginning to show if anyone looked closely enough. Twin heartbeats fluttering beneath her own ribs like captured birds desperate for freedom. The royal healer had confirmed it 2 weeks ago, her weathered face creasing with something between wonder and concern. 2 children, the Alpha King's children, conceived in darkness, in secret, in a love so fierce it had burned through every wall Marin had built around her heart. The massive doors at the end of the hall swung open. The crowd fell silent, hundreds of nobles and courtiers turning as one toward the entrance. Marin's breath caught in her throat. Alpha King Corvain stepped into the hall, and even after 4 months of knowing him, touching him, loving him in the shadows, the sight of him still stole the air from her lungs. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the lethal grace of a predator who knew exactly how dangerous he was. Silver gray hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes were the color of winter storms, pale and piercing and beautiful. 20 women stood in a line across the hall. 20 unmarried daughters of noble houses, each one groomed and perfected and presented like prizes waiting to be claimed. Marin stood among them, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. This was it. The moment Corvain would choose his queen before the entire kingdom. The moment he would make good on the promise he'd whispered against her skin in the darkness of his private chambers. I'll choose you. When the ceremony comes, I'll walk straight to you and claim you before everyone. You'll be my queen, Marin. You'll never have to hide again. She believed him. Despite everything, despite a lifetime of being overlooked and dismissed and reminded that she wasn't enough, she believed him. Corvain began walking down the line. He paused before each woman, his head tilting slightly as he caught her scent. That was how it worked, how true mates recognized each other. The pull of compatible pheromones, the instinct that went deeper than thought or reason. 10 women away. 8. 5. Marin's pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel the twins moving inside her as if they sensed the importance of this moment. Their father was coming. Their father would claim them, would protect them, would give them the legitimacy she'd never had. 3 women away. Corvain's gaze swept past Lady Helena, past the Duke's youngest daughter, moving closer. Marin allowed herself to lift her eyes to meet his stare for just a heartbeat. 2 women away, and then he was right in front of her. Marin's breath stopped. Her whole body went still. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. Corvain's eyes looked at her, through her, past her, like she was nothing but empty air. He took another step. He stopped in front of Celine. The world tilted beneath Marin's feet. No, this wasn't right. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. Corvain was standing before her sister, the woman who'd made Marin's life a careful torture of small cruelties and cutting words. And Corvain was looking at Celine the way he'd looked at Marin in the darkness, with heat, with certainty, with the unmistakable recognition of a wolf finding his mate. I choose Celine, Corvain announced, his voice carrying through the hall like a death knell. Daughter of Lord Thorn, my queen. The hall erupted in cheers, applause thundered off the stone walls. Nobles surged forward to offer congratulations, to witness the binding that would follow. Marin couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. Celine turned her head just enough to catch Marin's eye, and she smiled. Not the practiced, demure smile she wore for the court. This was something else entirely. Triumph, victory, the satisfied grin of someone who'd won a game Marin hadn't even known she was playing. In that moment, Marin understood. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. Celine knew. Somehow, impossibly, her sister knew everything. 4 months earlier, Marin had never intended to fall in love with a king. Silver Peak Palace rose from the mountain cliffs like a crown of black stone, its towers piercing clouds that never seemed to clear. Marin had lived within those walls her entire 19 years, not as a cherished daughter, not as nobility, as a shadow that everyone had learned to look past. Her father, Lord Thorn, had made his position clear from the day she was born. She was the product of a woman he'd married in secret, a woman who'd died bringing Marin into the world. A woman Lord Thorn had hidden away like a shameful secret, never acknowledging the marriage even after death. There had been whispers once quickly silenced. Whispers about strange silver light filling the birthing chamber that night. About Marin's mother being more than she seemed, about power in her bloodline that Lord Thorn had wanted to possess. But Lord Thorne had forbidden such talk, and eventually the whispers faded to nothing. All that remained was Marin, tolerated because abandoning her completely would raise questions, fed and clothed and given a small room in the servants' quarters, reminded every single day that she existed only through her father's questionable mercy. Celine, 3 years older and legitimate in every way that mattered, had been raised as the jewel of House Thorne, golden-haired where Marin was dark, celebrated where Marin was ignored, dressed in silks while Marin wore the cast-offs Celine had grown tired of. The cruelty had been constant, but never quite visible enough to call out. A foot extended to trip Marin in the hallway. Invitations to events that somehow never reached her. Whispered comments just loud enough to hear about knowing one's place. And the games. The horrible games where Celine and her friends would hunt Marin through the palace like prey, cornering her in storage rooms or abandoned corridors laughing at her fear. That's what had driven Marin to the king's private library that night 4 months ago. She'd been running from another hunt, her breath ragged in her chest, her hands shaking. The library had seemed empty, lit only by dying firelight. She'd pressed herself into an alcove behind a tapestry, trying to quiet her gasping breaths. That was when she heard his voice. "You can come out," King Corvain said from somewhere in the darkness. "I can smell your fear from across the room." Marin's blood had frozen solid in her veins. She knew that voice. Everyone in Silver Peak knew that voice. Alpha King Corvain had ruled these lands for 12 years since the death of his father in a border war. He was said to be cold, calculating, completely without mercy toward enemies or fools. She should have run, should have apologized and fled and never come back. Instead, she stepped out from behind the tapestry. The king sat in a leather chair by the fire, a book open in his lap. In the dim light, she could barely make out his features. Just the sharp angle of his jaw, the pale gleam of his eyes watching her with unsettling focus. "You're Lord Thorne's daughter," he said, not a question. "Yes, your majesty." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Why are you hiding in my library?" She should have lied, should have made up some excuse about cleaning or getting lost or anything other than the humiliating truth. But something in the darkness and the quiet of his voice made her reckless. "My sister's friends find it amusing to hunt me through the palace," she said. "I needed somewhere they wouldn't look." A long pause, then impossibly, the king laughed. It was a low sound, rusty like he hadn't used it in years. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "They won't find you here." She should have refused, should have remembered her place, her station, the 1,000 invisible rules that governed girls like her. But Marin had spent 19 years being invisible, and for the first time in her life, someone was actually seeing her. She sat. They talked until dawn painted the windows gray. He asked her questions no one had ever bothered to ask. About her thoughts, her dreams, the books she read when she could steal time in forgotten corners of the palace. She learned that he despised the politics of court, that he found most nobles insufferable, that he retreated to this library because it was the only place he could breathe. When she finally rose to leave, he caught her wrist. His hand was warm, strong, sending a shock of electricity up her arm. "Come back tomorrow night," he said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't quite a command either. It was something in between, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. She came back, and the night after that, and the night after that. Somewhere between the second week and the third, the conversations became something else. A brush of fingers that lasted too long, a gaze that dropped to her lips and lingered. The air between them growing thick with something neither of them named, but both of them felt. It was Marin who closed the distance first. She would remember that moment forever, would carry it like a treasure, even when everything else fell apart. The way she had risen from her chair, crossed to where he sat, and pressed her mouth to his before her courage could fail. He had frozen for one terrible heartbeat. Then his hands were in her hair, pulling her into his lap, and he was kissing her like a man drowning, and she was oxygen. "We shouldn't," he rasped against her throat. "I know," she breathed back. They did anyway. Night after night, she came to him in darkness. He never lit more than a single candle, and even that he kept far from where they tangled together on the leather couch. Eventually in his bed, in the chambers beyond the library where no one else was allowed. She learned the landscape of his body in shadows. The scars on his ribs from the battle that had killed his father. The way he shuddered when she kissed the curve of his neck. The sound he made when she touched him, just right, raw and desperate, and completely unlike the cold king everyone else saw. He learned her too. Every inch of skin, every gasp and sigh, the places that made her arch and the words that made her melt. "I'll choose you," he whispered one night, 3 months in his hand, spread across her bare stomach. "At the mating ceremony, I'll make you my queen." Marin's heart had soared so high she thought it might never come down. She should have known that anything that flew so high was destined to fall. The night before the ceremony, Marin was in her small room, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. Tomorrow. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow she would stand before the kingdom, not as an unwanted daughter, not as a shadow, but as Corvain's chosen mate. A knock on her door made her jump. Celine stood in the hallway holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She was dressed in a pale blue gown that made her look like something from a painting, her golden hair swept up in an elaborate style. "I thought we should talk," Celine said. Her smile was gentle, almost kind. "Before tomorrow changes everything." Marin hesitated. In 19 years, Celine had never sought her out for anything resembling sisterly conversation. But maybe this was real. Maybe knowing that Marin was about to become queen had shifted something in Celine had made her want to repair the bridge between them. "Come in," Marin said, stepping aside. Celine swept into the room, settling gracefully into the single chair. She poured wine into both glasses, the liquid dark as blood in the candlelight. "I wanted to apologize," Celine said, her voice soft, "for how I've treated you over the years. It was cruel and unfair, and I'm sorry." The words were exactly what Marin had wanted to hear her entire life. They settled over her like a balm, soothing wounds she hadn't realized still bled. "I forgive you," Marin said, taking the glass Celine offered. "To new beginnings," Celine said, raising her own glass. "To sisters." They drank. The wine was sweet warm, sliding down Marin's throat. She hadn't eaten much that day, too nervous about tomorrow, and the alcohol hit her system fast. "You must be so excited," Celine continued, pouring more wine into Marin's glass. "About the ceremony, about finally getting everything you deserve." "I am," Marin admitted. The room felt warm, soft at the edges. "I never thought I'd be chosen. I never thought anyone would see me as worthy of that kind of love." "Oh, but you are," Celine said, her smile widened. "You're so very worthy. That's why you need to be strong tomorrow. The ceremony can be overwhelming. Here, drink up. It'll help you sleep, help you be ready." Marin drank. The wine tasted different now, slightly bitter, but she was so tired, so very tired. Her limbs felt heavy, her thoughts slow and thick like honey. "Celine," she managed, her tongue clumsy in her mouth. "I don't feel well." "I know," Celine said. She stood moving to catch Marin as she swayed. "I know, little sister, but don't worry, I'll take care of everything." The world tilted. Marin's knees buckled, and Celine guided her fall onto the narrow bed. The ceiling spun above her candles, blurring into streaks of light. "What did you do?" Marin whispered. Celine's face appeared above her, beautiful and terrible. "What I had to do. You see, Marin, I know about your little secret. About the king and his nighttime visits to the library. About the touches and the whispers and the promises made in the dark." Horror flooded through Marin's drug system. "How? I followed you. Weeks ago, I saw you slip into his chambers." Celine's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. "At first I was going to expose you, but then I had a better idea. Why settle for ruining you when I could take everything you thought was yours?" "He won't choose you," Marin slurred. "He knows my scent. He knows me." "Does he?" Celine pulled a small vial from her pocket. "This is a very expensive perfume, made by a witch on the eastern border. It mimics scent perfectly. I've been studying you for weeks, Marin. Your mannerisms, your voice, even the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. In the darkness with your scent, in my performance, he'll never know the difference." She leaned closer, her breath hot against Marin's ear. "And the best part, I know you're pregnant. I paid the royal healer very well for that information. 3 months along with twins," she said. "The king's children growing in your body." Tears leaked from the corners of Marin's eyes. She tried to move to fight, but her body wouldn't respond. "That's why I have to do this," Celine continued. "If you stay, if those children are born, they'll be legitimate heirs. They'll have everything, and I'll have nothing. But if I become queen, if I take your place, then the children don't matter. You're just someone who got herself pregnant by some unknown man. You'll take them and disappear, and no one will ever know the truth." She straightened, smoothing her dress. "Father's gambling debts have nearly destroyed House Thorne. We owe $500,000 in gold to merchants and lords across the kingdom. The only way to save our family is for me to marry the king. I tried to do it the legitimate way, tried to catch his eye at court events, but he never looked at anyone. Until you." Celine moved to Marin's small wardrobe, pulling out the emerald dress Marin had carefully pressed for tomorrow. "So I'll be you tomorrow. I'll stand in your place, wear a veil thin enough to see through but thick enough to blur my features. I'll smell like you, move like you, And when he chooses me thinking I'm you, the binding will be complete. By the time he realizes his mistake, it will be too late. She paused at the door, looking back at Marin's paralyzed form on the bed. And don't worry about trying to interrupt the ceremony. The drug I gave you will keep you unconscious until well after it's over. By the time you wake up, I'll be queen. And you'll be nothing. Just like you've always been. The door closed. The key turned in the lock from the outside. Marin lay in the darkness, tears streaming into her hair, feeling the twins flutter inside her belly. She tried to scream, but no sound would come. Tried to move, but her body was lead. All she could do was lie there and feel everything she loved slip away into the darkness. Marin woke to silence and daylight streaming through the single window of her room. Her head pounded, her mouth dry as sand. She sat up slowly, the world tilting sickeningly around her. How long had she been unconscious? She stumbled to the window, looking out at the position of the sun. Late afternoon, the ceremony had been scheduled for noon. It was over. It was already over. She tried the door, locked just as Celine had left it, but the wood was old, the lock simple. Marin grabbed a hairpin from her small dresser, worked it into the mechanism with shaking hands. She'd learned to pick locks years ago, a skill born from being locked in storage rooms during Celine's hunts. The lock clicked. The door swung open. The corridors were empty, everyone likely still at the celebration feast. Marin ran, her bare feet silent on stone floors, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to stop this. Had to tell Corvain the truth before the binding was finalized. Had to make him see that Celine wasn't her, wasn't the woman he'd held in the darkness. The great hall door stood open. Music and laughter spilled out into the corridor. Marin skidded to a stop at the entrance, and her entire world collapsed. Corvain sat on the throne, dressed in formal black and silver. Beside him in the queen's seat sat Celine. She wore a crown of white gold and moonstones. She wore the emerald dress that was supposed to be Marin's. She wore a smile of such complete triumph that Marin wanted to scream. And Corvain was looking at her, looking at Celine with warmth in those storm-colored eyes, with his hand resting over hers on the arm of the throne. The binding was complete. The ceremony was done. Celine was queen. Someone noticed Marin in the doorway, a servant, eyes widening in recognition. Then another. Whispers began to spread through the crowd like ripples on water. Corvain's head turned. His gaze found Marin across the crowded hall. For just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Confusion. A frown creasing his brow. His nostrils flared as if trying to catch a scent. Celine leaned in close to him, whispering something in his ear. Whatever she said made his face harden, made his eyes go cold and distant. He looked back at Marin. And there was nothing there. No recognition. No love. Just the blank, dismissive stare he gave to any random servant who'd wandered where they shouldn't be. He didn't know her. With Celine's perfume still clinging to her skin from the ceremony, with the crowd between them, scattering her scent, he didn't recognize Marin at all. A guard approached her. "Miss, you shouldn't be here. The celebration is for nobility only." Marin couldn't speak, couldn't explain, couldn't do anything but stare at the man she loved sitting beside the sister who'd stolen everything. "Come on now," the guard said, not unkindly. He took her elbow, guiding her away from the hall. "Back to the servants' quarters with you." Marin let herself be led away. What else could she do? Who would believe her if she screamed the truth? She was unwanted. Celine was a legitimate noble daughter. Corvain had chosen Celine before the entire kingdom. The binding was complete, witnessed by hundreds. And Marin was just a girl who'd been foolish enough to believe she could be anything more. She walked back to her room in a daze. The guard left her at the door and she stepped inside, closing it behind her. For a long time, she just stood there, one hand pressed to her stomach where the twins were growing. Then the tears came, great wrenching sobs that tore from her chest and left her gasping. She sank to the floor, arms wrapped around herself, and wept for everything she'd lost. She cried until no tears remained, until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen and her chest ached from the force of her grief. Finally, she stood, wiped her face, looked around the small room that had never really been hers. She couldn't stay here. Celine had made that clear. If Marin remained in Silver Peak, her children would never be safe. Celine would find a way to destroy them, to eliminate any threat to her stolen crown. Marin had to leave, had to run, had to protect the two lives growing inside her, even if it meant giving up everything else. She gathered the few things she owned: a spare dress, warm and practical, the cloak she wore in winter, the small pouch of coins she'd saved over the years from mending work. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She couldn't risk going to the stables for a horse, couldn't risk being seen by anyone who might report back to Celine. She would have to walk. Marin pressed one hand to her belly, feeling the flutter of movement inside. "I'll keep you safe," she whispered. "I promise. Your father doesn't know you exist, but I'll make sure you have everything you need, somehow." She slipped out of the palace as night fell using the servants' entrance that led to the mountain pass. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her, just another shadow disappearing into the darkness. Behind her, the celebration continued, music and laughter echoing through stone halls, a kingdom rejoicing in their new queen. And no one noticed that Marin was gone. The road was brutal. Marin walked for 6 weeks, her body growing heavier with each passing day. The spring air still carried winter's chill, and at night she huddled beneath her thin cloak, shivering and terrified. She traded rides when she could, bartering mending work or the few coins she had left for a seat on merchant wagons heading south. She told them she was a widow named Elena, seeking family in distant provinces. No one asked too many questions. People rarely did when the answers might be inconvenient. The morning sickness was terrible in those early weeks. She would lean over the side of wagons, retching until her stomach was empty, while kindly merchants' wives patted her back and murmured sympathy. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. The sickness faded. Her body adjusted to carrying 2 lives instead of one. And Marin found a strange, fierce strength she'd never known she possessed. She was going to be a mother. These children, conceived in love, even if that love had been betrayed, deserved everything she could give them. They deserved safety, stability, a chance to grow up without the weight of illegitimacy crushing them. She would give them that, somehow. The final wagon dropped her in a territory so far south that snow still capped the mountains even in late spring. The driver pointed to a narrow path leading into a valley. "There's a village down there," he said. "Willowmere, small place, quiet. They might have work if you're handy with the needle." Marin thanked him and began the descent into the valley. The path was steep, winding through pine forests and across streams swollen with snowmelt. By the time she reached the valley floor, her feet were bleeding and her legs shook with exhaustion. But what she found made everything worth it. Willowmere was exactly what the driver had promised. A cluster of stone cottages nestled in a valley between 2 mountains far from any main road. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children played in the village square. A blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil. It was perfect. Isolated. Forgotten by the rest of the world. Safe. Marin used her last coins to rent a room above the blacksmith shop. She told the smith and his wife, a kind woman named Hetty, the same story she'd told everyone else. Widow, dead husband, nowhere else to go. They believed her without question. Or if they didn't believe her, they were kind enough not to pry. The village accepted her. They were simple people, farmers and craftsmen, too busy surviving to question a pregnant stranger's past. When her belly grew too large to hide, they assumed she'd been with child when her husband died. When she struggled with morning sickness that returned in her final month, the village healer checked on her daily. And when the twins came on a stormy autumn night when lightning split the sky and rain hammered the roof, the entire village seemed to hold its breath. Marin labored for 18 hours. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, waves of agony that crashed over her again and again. The healer Miriam stayed by her side through all of it, her weathered face calm and steady. "You're doing well," Miriam murmured, wiping Marin's forehead with a cool cloth. "Strong girl. Your babies will be here soon." But as the night wore on, something went wrong. The first baby, a boy, was breech. Marin could feel him struggling, could feel her own strength fading with each contraction. "He's stuck," Miriam said, her voice tight with concern. "The cord is wrapped around him. If we don't get him out soon, we'll lose him." "No," the word tore from Marin's throat. "No, please, please save him." She didn't know where the prayer came from, didn't know who she was praying to. She'd never been particularly religious, had never felt the presence of any divine force in her life. But in that moment, with her son dying inside her, she reached for something beyond herself, beyond the physical world. And something answered. Light exploded from her palms, pure silver radiance that filled the small room, bright as moonlight concentrated into a beam. It poured from her hands where they pressed against her swollen belly, wrapping around the struggling child inside. Miriam gasped, stumbling back from the bed. "What in the name of all God?" The light guided the baby, turned him, unwrapped the cord from around his tiny neck. And then he was sliding free into Miriam's shocked hands, screaming his arrival into the world. The light faded. Marin collapsed back against the pillows, utterly spent. "A boy," Miriam whispered, her voice shaking. She cleaned him quickly, wrapped him in a blanket, placed him on Marin's chest. A healthy boy. He was perfect. Tiny and red-faced and furious at being expelled from his warm home. His eyes, when they opened, were pale gray, storm-colored, the exact shade of his father's. Marin touched his face with trembling fingers. "Callum," she whispered. "Your name is Callum." 20 minutes later, his sister followed. No complications this time, no magical intervention needed. She came into the world fierce and loud, her cries echoing through the cottage. Miriam placed her beside her brother on Marin's chest. A girl, just as healthy, just as strong. This one had dark hair like Marin's, but her jawline, the set of her tiny brows, the determined way she gripped Marin's finger, all Corvain. All fierce alpha strength wrapped in a body that weighed less than a sack of flour. "Bryony," Marin murmured, tears streaming down her face. Callum and Bryony. Two lives, two perfect, beautiful lives that would never know their father. Would never know that they were born of a king's bloodline. Would grow up as the children of a widow, simple and safe, and hidden from the world that would destroy them if it knew the truth. Miriam cleaned up, disposed of the afterbirth, made sure Marin was stable. But before she left, she stood by the bed for a long moment, her eyes on the twins sleeping against their mother's chest. "That light," Miriam said quietly. "I've only seen magic like that once before. Many years ago, there was a woman, a stranger, who passed through Willowmere. She glowed with the same silver radiance." Marin's heart stuttered. Who was she? She never gave her name, but she had the look of someone running from something terrible. Miriam's gaze sharpened. She was pregnant too. Said she was being hunted by a lord who wanted to possess her power. Moon-blessed, she called it. A gift from the old goddess herself. The room suddenly felt very cold. What happened to her? She stayed one night, then disappeared. I heard later that she'd been caught, forced into marriage, died in childbirth. Miriam's eyes moved from the twins to Marin's face. The child she carried would be about 19 years old now. And if that child inherited even a fraction of her mother's power, they'd be worth hunting. The implication hung in the air between them like smoke. "I won't tell anyone," Miriam said, "about the light, about what I suspect. But you should know what you are, girl. Moon-blessed bloodlines don't appear by accident. Your mother must have been powerful, and that power lives in you now." She moved to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. "It lives in them too, the babies. I saw the silver in their eyes when the light filled the room. They'll have the gift when they are grown." "Will they be safe?" Marin whispered. "If anyone finds out, then don't let anyone find out." Miriam's voice was firm. "You're a widow named Elena who came here from the north. Your babies are normal children. That's the story, and we'll all keep to it." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Marin looked down at her sleeping children. Callum and Bryony, heirs to a kingdom they would never inherit, carriers of a magical bloodline they could never reveal. She pressed her lips to each small forehead. "I'll keep you safe," she promised. "No matter what it takes. You'll grow up free and loved and happy. I swear it." Outside, the storm was passing, rain gentled to a whisper against the windows. Lightning faded to distant flickers on the horizon. And in a small cottage in a forgotten valley, a mother held her children and began to build a new life from the ashes of the old. 3 years and 8 months passed. They were the hardest and the happiest years of Marin's life. She bought the cottage with money earned from sewing work, her fingers flying through hem repairs and dress alterations for the village women. It wasn't much, the cottage. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, a garden plot where she grew vegetables. But it was hers, truly hers. The first thing in her life that no one could take away. Callum grew into a serious, watchful child. He rarely cried even as a baby, just observed everything with those storm-colored eyes that missed nothing. By age 2, he was already protective of his sister, standing between her and anything he perceived as a threat. Bryony was his opposite in every way. Wild, fearless, laughing at everything. She climbed before she could walk properly, getting stuck in trees and needing to be rescued by increasingly exasperated villagers. She named every animal in the village, from the chickens to the horses to the grumpy old tomcat that lived behind the bakery. Marin taught them to read using the few books she'd been able to buy from traveling merchants. Taught them numbers and letters and the names of constellations. Told them stories every night before bed, tales of brave heroes and magical quests. She never told them about their father. How could she? They were too young to understand betrayal and stolen identities and the complicated web of lies that had led to their birth. When they asked, she told them what she told the village. Their papa had been a soldier who died in a border skirmish before they were born. A good man, brave and strong, who would have loved them if he'd lived to meet them. It wasn't entirely a lie. Corvain would have loved them, would have treasured them, if he'd known they existed. But he didn't know. And Maren had made peace with that. This life, small and simple and safe, was enough. It had to be enough. She kept her ears sharp for news from the north. Traveling merchants brought gossip, and she listened carefully to every word about Silver Peak. The Alpha King and his queen had yet to produce an heir, they said. Nearly 4 years of marriage and still no children. Rumors swirled about whether Queen Selene was barren. Maren felt a bitter satisfaction at that. Selene had stolen a crown but couldn't produce the one thing that would secure it. The one thing Maren had created without even trying. There were other rumors too, darker ones, about the king growing cold and distant, about him spending more time alone than with his queen, about a sickness that seemed to be slowly consuming him, making him weak. Maren told herself it didn't matter. That chapter of her life was closed. Corvain had made his choice, even if that choice had been based on deception. She had made hers too, to protect her children, to raise them in peace, to never look back. But sometimes late at night when Callum and Bryony were sleeping, she would sit by the fire and remember. The warmth of Corvain's hands, the rumble of his laugh, the way he had looked at her in the darkness, as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. Had any of it been real, or had she just been a convenient distraction, easily replaced? She never found an answer, and eventually she stopped asking the question. Life in Willowmere settled into a comfortable rhythm. Seasons turned. Callum and Bryony grew stronger, smarter, more themselves with each passing month. The village embraced them as their own, and Maren allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were actually safe. She should have known better. The stranger arrived on a gray autumn morning when the twins were nearly 4 years old. Maren was hanging laundry behind her cottage when she first noticed him. A man, perhaps 30 years old, dressed in traveling clothes that were too fine for a common merchant. His boots were good leather, his cloak lined with fur, and his eyes swept the small village with the calculating assessment of someone looking for something specific. Maren's instincts screamed warning. She abandoned the laundry and moved quickly toward where Callum and Bryony were playing near the village well. They were stacking stones into a precarious tower, arguing about whose turn it was to add the next one. The stranger's gaze landed on them and went very, very still. Maren's heart stopped. She could see what he was seeing, Callum's distinctive pale eyes catching the morning light as he laughed at something his sister said. Bryony's dark hair tumbling wild around her face, the same shade as Maren's own. 2 children who looked nothing like any of the other villagers. 2 children who looked exactly like what they were. The offspring of an Alpha King and his hidden lover. The stranger took a step toward them. Maren was there in an instant, positioning herself between the stranger and her children. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin for the first time in years, hackles rising with protective fury. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. The stranger's head turned. He was younger than she'd first thought, with a soldier's bearing and a scar across his left cheekbone that spoke of violence survived. "Just passing through," he said. His accent marked him as northern. "From Silver Peak or near enough." "The inn is at the other end of the village," Maren said flatly. "They can help you with whatever you need." The stranger's gaze flickered to the children again, lingering on Callum's eyes. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Calculation. "Lovely children," he said carefully. "Their father must be proud." Every protective instinct Maren possessed screamed danger. "Their father is dead," she replied without blinking. "Died in a border war before they were born." A long pause. The stranger inclined his head in a gesture that felt too formal for a simple traveler. "My condolences." Then he turned and walked toward the inn. Maren didn't relax until he was out of sight. Even then, she gathered the children quickly, ushering them inside the cottage and bolting the door behind her. "Mama." Callum looked up at her with those 2 observant eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart." She knelt down, pulling both children into her arms. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. That night, after Callum and Bryony were asleep in their small beds, Maren sat by the window and watched the inn at the edge of the village. The stranger's window glowed with candlelight until well past midnight. He wasn't just passing through, he was searching for something. For someone. The stranger, whose name she learned from the innkeeper's daughter was Dristan, stayed in Willowmere for 3 days. 3 days of watching, 3 days of asking casual questions about newcomers to the village, about young widows, about children with unusual coloring. Maren kept Callum and Bryony hidden at Hetty's cottage, making excuses about helping with baking. Hetty Blesser asked no questions and kept the children entertained with stories and sweets. On the third day Duristan left, Marin watched from behind her curtain as he rode north, his horse disappearing over the ridge. Only when he was completely out of sight did she allow herself to breathe. But relief lasted only a moment, because she knew deep in her bones that this was just the beginning. Dristan had been asking questions, had been gathering information, and eventually that information would make its way back to whoever had sent him, back to Silver Peak, back to Corvain. That night, Marin began to pack. She would take the children and run again, south across the mountains into territories where Silver Peak held no sway. She would change their names again, find another forgotten village, build another life from nothing. She had done it once, she could do it again. But when she looked at Callum and Bryony sleeping peacefully in their beds, something cracked inside her. They had friends here, a home. Callum was finally learning to read with the village teacher. Bryony had named every chicken in Hetty's yard and visited them daily. How many times could she uproot them before it broke something that couldn't be mended? Marin sat down heavily on the edge of her bed, pressing her palms to her eyes. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Duristan had been exactly what he claimed, a traveler passing through, curious about a small village, and nothing more. Maybe she was seeing threats and shadows. She decided to wait one more week. If nothing happened, if no more strangers came asking questions, she would let herself believe they were safe. 6 days later, as autumn leaves painted the valley in shades of fire, he came. Marin was kneading bread in her small kitchen when she felt it. A presence so powerful it made her wolf surge to the surface, hackles raised, teeth bared. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against her skin like a physical weight. She knew that presence. She had felt it 1,000 times in darkened rooms wrapped around her, like armor, like possession, like love. Her hands stilled in the dough. Her heart stopped beating for one terrible moment. "Mama?" Bryony looked up from the wooden blocks she was stacking on the floor. "What's wrong?" Marin couldn't answer. Her throat had closed entirely. Outside footsteps approached, heavy, measured, stopping directly before her door. 3 knocks. Each one resonated through her bones like a death knell. "Callum," Marin managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Take your sister to the back room. Close the door. Don't come out until I call for you." Callum's eyes widened with understanding beyond his years. He grabbed Bryony's hand and pulled her away without argument. The door to the tiny bedroom closed with a soft click. Marin wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. She took a breath that did nothing to steady her racing heart. Then she opened the door. Alpha King Corvain stood on her threshold. He looked exactly as she remembered, but hollower. The same sharp features, the same powerful build, the same silver-gray hair that fell across his forehead. But there were shadows beneath his eyes now, hollows in his cheeks that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in years, like a man who'd been searching for something precious and lost. His gaze swept over her face and something fractured in his expression. Recognition, disbelief, a pain so raw it made her physically flinch. "Marin," he breathed, just her name, nothing more. But the way he said it carried the weight of 3 years and 8 months of searching, of questions without answers, of a wound that had never healed. Marin's hand tightened on the doorframe until her knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door to protect what she'd built, to keep this man from shattering the fragile piece she'd carved from nothing. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the man she'd loved, the man who'd chosen her sister, the man who was the father of the children sleeping in the next room. "Your Majesty," she said, and watched him flinch at the formality. "You shouldn't be here." "Where else should I be?" His voice was rough, scraped raw. "I've looked for you for nearly 4 years. 4 years, Marin. I thought you were dead. I thought someone had taken you, hurt you, killed you. I've sent men to every corner of the kingdom, searched every village, every town. And yet you never thought to look in the one place you'd never expect to find me." Marin's laugh was bitter, a forgotten village at the edge of nowhere. Corvain took a step forward. Marin took one back. "Why did you run?" The question emerged like it had been clawed from somewhere deep inside him. "You know why?" "No," he shook his head slowly. "I don't. I woke up the morning after the ceremony and you were gone. No note, no explanation, nothing. Just vanished like you'd never existed." The morning after, Marin stared at him, genuine confusion breaking through her anger. "You married my sister. You stood before the kingdom and chose her over me. What explanation did you need?" Something flickered across Corvain's face. Confusion, then dawning horror. "Chose her over you, Marin. What are you talking about? I never chose Celine. I didn't want to marry her. I was trying to find you. A small sound from the back room cut him off. A child's whisper quickly hushed by another child. Corvain's head snapped toward the sound. His entire body went rigid. His nostrils flared as he inhaled deeply, and Marin watched his expression transform from confusion to something far more dangerous. There are children here, he said slowly. I can smell them. 2 of them. Marin's heart stopped. Their scent, Corvain continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. It's familiar. Like mine, but different. Like... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The bedroom door creaked open. Callum stood in the gap, one small hand still on the handle, his pale eyes mirrors of his father's fixed on the stranger who had invaded their home. Corvain made a sound like he'd been stabbed. Papa? Bryony's voice piped up from behind her brother. She pushed past Callum, her curiosity overriding her brother's caution. Mama, is that man our papa? He has Callum's eyes. The world went very, very still. Corvain turned to look at Marin. The devastation on his face was complete, absolute. A man watching everything he thought he knew about his life crumbled to dust. Tell me, he rasped. Tell me they're not mine. Marin lifted her chin. I can't, because they are. For a long moment, no one moved. Corvain stared at the children. The children stared at Corvain. Marin stood between them, her body positioned like a shield, ready to defend her babies against the man who had fathered them. Then Bryony, never one to let silence linger, marched directly toward the Alpha King. Small hands planted on her hips, dark hair wild around her face. Bryony, no. Marin reached for her, but her daughter was already standing before Corvain. Are you really our papa? Bryony demanded. Mama said our papa died in a war. Corvain lowered himself to one knee, bringing his face level with hers. This close, the resemblance was unmistakable. Bryony had Marin's coloring, but the stubborn set of her jaw, the shape of her brows, the way she lifted her chin in challenge all Corvain. I'm not dead, Corvain said, his voice unsteady. I just didn't know where to find you. Why not? Bryony pressed her child's logic, cutting straight to the heart of things. You're supposed to be a king. Kings can find anyone. Something crumpled in Corvain's expression. You're right. I should have found you sooner. I'm sorry. Bryony, Marin's voice was sharp. Come here, now. But Mama, if he's our papa, come here. The command brooked no argument. Bryony retreated to Marin's side, reaching up to grip her mother's skirt with both small fists. Callum remained in the doorway, silent and watchful. His gaze never left Corvain, assessing him with an intensity that seemed far too old for a child not yet 4. Corvain rose slowly. His eyes moved from the children to Marin, and the devastation had hardened into something else now. Determination. And beneath it, a fury she could see him fighting to contain. You hid them from me, he said quietly. My own children. For nearly 4 years. I protected them. From what? From their father? From their birthright. From the woman you married. Marin's voice could have cut glass. From the sister who has hated me since the day I was born. Do you think I ran for myself? Do you think I wanted to leave? Then why did you? Because you chose her. The words tore from Marin's throat before she could stop them. 4 years of pain, 4 years of grief, 4 years of questions, she could never answer all of it, bursting free. You walked right past me. You looked through me like I didn't exist. And then you stood before everyone and announced that you were taking Celine as your queen. Corvain shook his head. That's not what happened. I was there, I watched you. I never chose Celine. His voice rose, cracking on her sister's name. I would never have chosen her. I went to that ceremony intending to choose you. Only you. He took a step closer, and this time Marin didn't retreat. But when I walked the line, Corvain continued, when I reached where you should have been standing, you weren't there. Your scent was wrong. Everything was wrong. Marin felt the blood drain from her face. What? The woman in your position smelled like you, looked like you from a distance. But it wasn't you. I knew it wasn't you. I thought I was going mad, that maybe I'd imagined everything between us, that I'd invented a connection that never existed. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The woman before me claimed to be you. She called herself Marin. She said she'd been waiting for me, that she was ready to be my queen. And I was so confused, so desperate to understand why nothing felt right, that I chose her anyway. Because even if something was wrong, even if she wasn't quite the woman I remembered, she was all I had. Memory struck Marin like a physical blow. The moments before Corvain entered the hall, Celine appearing at her side in the small antechamber, pressing a cup of wine into her hands. insisting she drink for courage. The strange heaviness that had followed making her limbs sluggish, her thoughts slow as honey. She drugged me, Marin breathed. Celine drugged me and took my place in line. The full horror of it washed over her. She used perfume to mimic my scent. She wore a veil thin enough to see through but thick enough to blur her features. She told you she was me. Corvain's expression confirmed everything. I didn't know until 2 months later that something was deeply wrong. The woman I married, the woman I thought was you, she was nothing like the person I'd held in my arms. Cold where you were warm. Calculating where you were genuine. By the time I realized the truth, you were already gone. Why didn't you come after me immediately? Celine told everyone you'd run off with a lover. His voice was hollow. That you'd been having an affair for months with some merchant. That the shame of being exposed had driven you away. I didn't believe it. I knew it was a lie, but I had no proof, and she was already my queen, already bound to me, by ceremony witnessed by hundreds. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so achingly familiar that Marin's chest tightened. I've spent nearly 4 years trapped in a marriage with a woman I despise, searching for the one I actually wanted, for you. Marin wanted to rage at him, wanted to scream about the years she'd spent believing he'd betrayed her. But looking at him now, seeing the genuine anguish in his face, she understood. They had both been victims of Celine's manipulation, both been played like pieces on a game board. The children, Corvain said, his voice breaking, you were already pregnant at the ceremony. 3 months, I found out 2 weeks before. I was going to tell you after you chose me, after we were officially bound. Marin's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, remembering. I thought we'd announce it together, thought it would be a celebration. But instead you ran. Instead I protected them, because I realized that if I stayed, if anyone discovered I was carrying the king's children while you were married to my sister Celine, would find a way to destroy them, to eliminate any threat to her stolen crown. Corvain's gaze moved to Callum and Bryony standing on either side of their mother. The hunger in his eyes was painful to witness. A man seeing everything he'd lost without ever knowing what he had. A son and a daughter, he whispered. Despite everything, despite the anger and the fear and the years of pain between them, Marin felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the cold king who had seemingly discarded her. This was a man who had been deceived as thoroughly as she had. A man who had lost everything without ever knowing what he'd lost. Callum, she called softly. Come here. Her son emerged from the doorway, approaching with the cautious grace that came from being the protective older twin. He stopped beside his sister, both children, now standing between their parents, looking up with wide eyes. This is your father, Marin said. The words cost her more than she could express. Alpha King Corvain of Silver Peak. Callum studied Corvain for a long moment, those matching pale eyes taking his measure. Then he extended one small hand with grave formality. Hello, he said solemnly. I'm Callum. This is Bryony. She talks too much and she steals my toys. But you're not allowed to yell at her. That's my job. Corvain dropped to his knees before his children. He took Callum's hand with infinite care, his own hand dwarfing the small one that gripped his fingers with surprising strength. Hello, Callum, he managed. I promise I'll never yell at either of you. His voice shattered completely. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. Bryony never wanted to be left out, threw her arms around Corvain's neck. The gesture was so sudden, so trusting, that it broke something in him. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as he wrapped his arms around his daughter, then reached out to pull Callum close as well. Marin watched the Alpha King crumble in her children's embrace. Watched 4 years of searching finally reach their end. And despite herself, despite everything, she felt the first fragile stirring of something that might eventually become hope. Night fell over Willowmere. Corvain's guards, a small unit of 4 men who had accompanied him on this final search, were dispatched to the inn with strict orders to speak to no one. As far as the village knew, they were simply traveling soldiers seeking shelter for the night. Marin prepared a simple dinner while Corvain sat with the children at her small wooden table. She listened to Bryony's endless chatter, to Callum's quieter questions, to Corvain's voice, as he answered each one with patience she wouldn't have expected from the fearsome king of legend. Do you have a crown? Bryony demanded, swinging her legs. Several, actually. They're heavy and uncomfortable. Do you live in a castle? I do. It has 312 rooms. Can we visit? Corvain's gaze found Marin's across the cottage. That's something your mother and I need to discuss. After dinner, after the children had been bathed and dressed in their nightclothes, Marin tucked them into their small beds. Callum's eyes were already drooping, but Bryony fought sleep as always. Is Papa really going to stay? She whispered. For tonight, Marin said carefully. We'll see about tomorrow. I like him, Bryony announced. He has kind eyes, not scary king eyes. Marin kissed her forehead. Sleep now, little one. She closed the bedroom door gently and found Corvain standing by the fireplace staring into the flames. In the flickering light, she could see how much the years had changed him. The new lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, the way he held himself like a man carrying an impossible weight. They're remarkable, he said without turning. You've raised them well. I've done my best. In hiding, in fear, because of what my wife did to you. He turned then, and his expression was fierce. She will pay for this, Marin. Every moment of suffering she caused you. Every day you spent running. Every year I lost with my children. She will answer for all of it. And how will you accomplish that? Marin settled into the chair by the fire, suddenly weary. She's your queen, bound to you by ceremony. The laws of Silver Peak don't allow for setting aside a royal union. Laws can change. Can they? She met his gaze steadily. Your ancestors created those laws specifically to prevent kings from discarding inconvenient wives. The nobility would revolt if you tried to alter them for personal reasons. Corvain's jaw tightened. There must be a way. I won't remain bound to her, not now that I know the truth. What truth? The word of a woman who disappeared 4 years ago and conveniently returned with 2 children. Marin shook her head. Celine will deny everything. She'll claim I seduced you in an attempt to advance my position, that I ran when she exposed my schemes, that the children belong to some unknown lover. Who do you think the court will believe, their anointed queen or the unwanted daughter who was always jealous of her legitimate sister? The fire crackled between them. Corvain's hands opened and closed at his sides, a gesture of frustration and helplessness. You speak as if you've thought about this before, he said finally. Every night for 4 years. Marin's voice was flat. Every possible scenario, every way this could unfold. That's why I stayed hidden, because the moment I revealed myself, the moment you found us, everything would become more complicated, more dangerous. Dangerous how? Marin looked toward the door behind which her children slept. Celine hasn't produced an heir. 4 years of marriage and no children. The whispers have already started, haven't they? Questions about whether the queen is barren, whether the succession is at risk. Corvain nodded slowly. Callum and Bryony are your only children, your only heirs. Marin's voice hardened. What do you think Celine will do when she learns they exist? When she realizes her position, her power, her entire future depends on keeping them from ever being acknowledged. The color drained from Corvain's face. She would never harm children. She drugged me and stole my identity to marry you. She told the entire kingdom I was faithless and ran away with a lover. She has spent 4 years enjoying power and privilege that should have been mine. Marin's hands trembled with fury she could barely contain. Do not tell me what Celine would never do. You don't know her. You've never known her. But I grew up with her cruelty. I know exactly how far she's willing to go. Silence stretched between them, thick with implications neither wanted to voice. Then we must be careful, Corvain said at last. Strategic. I won't let her harm our children. How? Marin's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. The moment you return to Silver Peak with 2 previously unknown heirs, she'll know. She'll start plotting. And we both know she has allies at court. People who benefit from her position. People who would happily help her eliminate threats to her power. Then I won't return with them. Corvain moved closer, dropping to his knees before her chair. This close, she could see the exhaustion carved into every feature, the weariness that went bone deep. I'll establish protection here, he said. Guards, wards, whatever it takes to keep them safe while I deal with Celine. And me? The question emerged before Marin could stop it. Corvain reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed against her cheek, tracing the curve of her jaw with heartbreaking gentleness. You belong at my side, he said. You always have. I was a fool not to see the deception before the ceremony, not to realize the woman I was binding myself to wasn't the one I loved. Marin's breath caught. You loved me. From the first night you stumbled into my library. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. From the first time you spoke to me like a person instead of a king. You saw me, Marin, the real me. Not the crown, not the power, just the man. Do you have any idea how rare that is? You never said. I was afraid, Adaimed. The admission seemed to cost him something. Afraid of what it meant. afraid of what it would require of me. Kings don't marry. They don't follow their hearts. I convinced myself there would be time to figure it out, that after the ceremony I would find a way to make it work. And then I disappeared. And then you disappeared. His voice cracked, and I realized that every fear, every obstacle I'd imagined, none of it mattered, not compared to losing you. Marin wanted to believe him. Every part of her ached to believe him, but 4 years of pain couldn't be erased with pretty words, no matter how sincere. You're still married to my sister, she said quietly. A marriage built on lies and deception. It doesn't matter how it was built. It exists. She pulled back from his touch, needing the distance to think clearly. And until it doesn't, until Celine is exposed and removed, there can be nothing between us. Not again. Corvain's hand dropped to his side. The rejection landed visibly a physical blow. But he didn't argue. I understand, he said. I'll earn back your trust, Marin, however long it takes. Whatever I must do, I will prove to you that I'm worthy of the chance you once gave me. Before she could respond, something shifted in the air. A coldness that hadn't been there before seeping through the cottage walls like winter mist. Corvain shuddered. The movement was subtle, but Marin caught it. Are you all right? She asked. Fine. But his voice was strained, and she noticed for the first time how pale he'd become, how his hands trembled slightly as he pushed himself to his feet. Just tired from the journey. It was a lie, she knew it immediately. The same instinct that had always allowed her to read him, to see beneath the mask he wore for everyone else, now screamed that something was deeply wrong. Corvain, he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I should let you rest. We'll talk more in the morning. Make plans. I'll find a way to fix this, Marin. I swear it. He moved toward the door, and she saw his hand shake as he reached for the handle. The cold seemed to follow him, radiating from his body like a winter storm contained in human flesh. Wait! Marin stood, catching his arm. His skin was ice beneath her fingers, far colder than any shifter should ever be. Something is wrong with you. Tell me. Corvain went very still. For a long moment he didn't respond. Then slowly he turned to face her. The mask was gone. Beneath it was exhaustion so profound it seemed carved into his bones. And something else. Fear. There's a curse, he said quietly, on the kings of Silver Peak. It's been in my bloodline for generations. Marin's blood turned to ice. What kind of curse? Corvain's smile was bitter, broken. The kind that's slowly killing me. The curse had a name. The severance. Corvain told her as they sat by the dying fire, his voice hollow, his skin still carrying that unnatural chill. It had been placed on his ancestor 8 generations ago by a scorned witch. A king of Silver Peak had taken a witch as his lover, promised her marriage, then cast her aside for a political union. In her fury and heartbreak, she had cursed his bloodline. When a king of Silver Peak was bound by ceremony to someone who was not his true mate, his life force would begin to drain. Slowly at first, then faster. The curse fed on the wrongness of the pun, growing stronger as it consumed him. My ancestors learned to avoid it, Corvain said, staring into the embers, by never forming deep attachments, by choosing political marriages with women they felt nothing for. As long as there was no true mate to be separated from, the curse remained dormant. But you had a true mate. I did. His eyes found hers, filled with grief. I do, and I bound myself to another woman instead. Marin's chest constricted. You didn't know. Celine deceived you. The curse doesn't care about intentions. He lifted his hand, and even in the dim light, Marin could see the frost creeping across his knuckles, a thin layer of ice crystallizing on his skin. For 4 years it's been feeding on me, he continued, getting stronger. When I finally found you tonight, felt you near me again. He shuddered. It's like the curse realized what it was missing, what I was missing. It's accelerating. There must be a cure. There is. Corvain's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The bond must be completed. The true mate must be claimed properly, by ceremony and by blood. Only then will the curse release its hold. Then we complete it. I'm still married to Celine. The words fell like stones. Corvain looked at her, and she saw the trap closing around them just as clearly as he did. The curse requires a legitimate bond, he explained. As long as my marriage to Celine stands, I cannot bind myself to you, and I cannot dissolve the marriage without exposing her crimes, which I cannot prove, without witnesses who would never speak against the queen. Marin felt the walls pressing in. Celine had planned this perfectly. Even if Corvain found his true mate, even if he discovered the deception, he would be powerless to act. The curse would kill him while his false queen watched and smiled. How long? Marin asked. How long do you have? Corvain didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was barely audible. Weeks, perhaps less now that I've found you. The curse knows its grip is threatened. It will fight to finish what it started. Marin wanted to scream, wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all. 4 years of separation, 4 years of believing he had betrayed her. And now that she finally knew the truth, she was going to lose him anyway. There has to be another way, she said fiercely. My ancestors who survived either never found their true mates, or they found them after previous queens had died of natural causes. Corvain's smile was ghastly. I could wait for Celine to die naturally, but I suspect I'll be long gone before that happens. What if she didn't die naturally? The words hung in the air between them. Marin hadn't meant to say them aloud, but she didn't take them back. Corvain's gaze sharpened. I cannot murder my Queen Marin, no matter what she's done. The kingdom would never accept a king who killed his wife. I'm not suggesting murder. I'm suggesting justice, Marin leaned forward. You said you couldn't prove her crimes, but what if you could? What if there were witnesses willing to speak? Who would dare? Selene has spent 4 years consolidating power, placing her allies in every position of influence. Anyone who opposed her has been quietly removed. What about her own words? What if she could be goaded into confessing publicly? Before Corvain could respond, a sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on the path to the cottage. Multiple people moving quickly. Corvain was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to the sword at his belt. Marin moved to stand between him and the bedroom where the children slept. The door burst open. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it a scent that made Marin's wolf snarl with instant recognition. Celine stood in the doorway. She was flanked by 4 armed guards, her golden hair gleaming in the moonlight. She wore traveling clothes of fine wool, her cloak lined with ermine. She looked older than Marin remembered, harder. The softness of youth replaced by something calculating and cruel. But it was her eyes that made Marin's blood run cold. They swept the small cottage with possessive fury, landing on Corvain, then moving past him to the bedroom door. Well, Celine breathed. Isn't this cozy? The king reunited with his little... Her gaze fixed on the bedroom door. Through the gap, Marin could see 2 small figures standing just inside, woken by the commotion. Celine's face went white, then red. Children, she said slowly. 2 of them. She took a step into the cottage, her guards moving with her. With those eyes, that hair. Her voice rose to something shrill, barely controlled. You bore him children, you miserable, conniving little... Careful, sister. Marin's voice was ice. You're speaking to the mother of the future rulers of Silver Peak. They are illegitimate. They have no claim. They have every claim. Corvain's voice was weak but certain. He swayed slightly, and Marin realized the curse was taking its toll. The confrontation, the stress, the proximity to both his true mate and his false one, all of it accelerating the drain on his life force. They are my blood, he continued, my heirs. And you are nothing but a fraud who deceived her way onto my throne. Celine's face contorted with rage. I am your queen. I was chosen before the entire kingdom. You were not chosen. You stole the place of the woman I actually wanted. Corvain's hand found Marin's, gripping it tightly. You drugged your sister, mimicked her scent, answered to her name. Everything about our marriage was built on lies. You have no proof of that. I have her, Corvain gestured to Marin, the woman who was actually supposed to stand before me that night. The woman whose children carry my bloodline. The woman I have spent 4 years searching for. The word of a bitter daughter who couldn't accept her place. Celine's smile was vicious. Who will the court believe, their anointed queen or a jealous half-sister who ran away in shame? They'll believe me. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Everyone turned. An old woman stood there wrapped in a traveling cloak. Her face was weathered by years, her white hair braided down her back. But her eyes were sharp and clear. Marin recognized her instantly. Miriam, the midwife who had attended her birth. The woman who had helped bring Callum and Bryony into the world. I was there, Miriam said, stepping into the cottage. 22 years ago when Lord Thorne's wife gave birth to Marin. And I was there 4 years ago when Lady Celine came to me seeking a particular kind of potion. Celine's face went white. You lying old hag, she hissed. A potion to mimic another's scent, Miriam continued calmly. She told me it was for a masquerade ball. I didn't think much of it at the time. But when the true Marin disappeared and the false one took her place, I began to wonder. She reached into her cloak and withdrew a small vial. I kept a sample of the potion. It can be tested, analyzed. The ingredients are distinctive, and I kept records of who purchased them. Celine's composure finally cracked completely. She lunged toward Miriam, but her guards hesitated, confused about whose orders to follow. "Seize her," Celine screamed. "Seize all of them. The children, the witch, all of them. I am your queen, I command you." The guards didn't move. "The king is our liege lord," one of them said quietly. His hand moved to his sword, but not to draw it, to rest on the hilt in warning. "We follow his commands, not yours, especially when you've just admitted to treason." Celine froze. "I admitted nothing." "You demanded we seize the king himself," the guard said. "That's enough." Celine backed toward the door, her eyes wild. She stumbled over the threshold and fell. When she rose, there was a knife in her hand pulled from somewhere in her sleeve. She didn't aim for the guards, didn't aim for Corvain or Marin or even Miriam. She aimed for the children. "If I can't have heirs," Celine snarled, "neither can you." She lunged. Marin didn't think. She moved on pure instinct, throwing herself between her children and the blade. She felt the knife slice across her forearm, felt hot blood spill down her wrist. And then something else surged up from deep inside her. Light. It exploded from her palms, silver and brilliant, filling the cottage with radiance so bright that everyone recoiled. Celine screamed, the knife falling from her hands as she collapsed to her knees. Marin stood in the center of it all, power flowing through her veins like liquid moonlight, ancient and wild and utterly overwhelming. It poured from her hands where they were raised defensively, wrapping around Callum and Bryony in a protective shield. "Moon-blessed," Miriam breathed from somewhere behind the light. "Just like your mother." The light faded slowly, leaving Marin trembling, her wounded arm forgotten. She looked at her hands, still faintly glowing, and felt the truth settle into her bones. Her mother hadn't been an ordinary woman. She had been something far rarer, a carrier of ancient magic, a bloodline touched by the moon goddess herself. And she had passed that gift to her daughter. "You can save him," Miriam said quietly, moving to Marin's side. "The king, the curse that's killing him. Your light can break it." Marin looked at Corvain. He had collapsed against the wall during the chaos frost spreading rapidly across his chest. His breathing was shallow, his eyes barely open. She looked at her children, huddled together in the bedroom doorway, safe but terrified. She looked at her sister, crumpled on the floor, finally defeated, and she made her choice. The guards bound Celine's hands while Marin knelt beside Corvain. He was barely conscious, his skin pale as snow, his lips tinged with blue. The curse had sensed its opportunity when Celine made her move. It was trying to finish him before Marin could intervene. "Tell me what to do," Marin said to Miriam. "Quickly." The old midwife knelt beside her. "The moon-blessed can forge bonds that transcend ordinary ceremony. Your mother could have done it had she lived. You must reach into him, find the corruption where the false bond sits, and burn it away, then replace it with truth." "How?" "You'll know." Miriam placed a weathered hand over Marin's heart. "The power answers to love, child. It always has." Marin took a shaking breath. She placed both hands on Corvain's chest, feeling the ice beneath his skin. The wrongness coiled around his heart like a serpent. She closed her eyes and reached. The curse fought her immediately. It was old, vicious, desperate to survive. It showed her visions of failure, of Corvain dying in her arms, of her children growing up without a father. It whispered that she was too weak, too untrained, too late. But beneath the curse she found him, the real him, the man who had laughed in a darkened library, the man who had held her like she was precious, the man who had searched for 4 years because losing her had broken something inside him that could never be repaired. She wrapped her light around that essence and pulled. The curse screamed. She felt it tearing at her, clawing, biting. Her wounded arm burned like fire. Blood dripped from her nose, her ears. Somewhere far away she heard Bryony crying, heard Callum calling her name. But she didn't stop. She found the false bond, the twisted connection that linked Corvain to Celine. And she burned it, poured every ounce of her newfound power into destroying the lie that was killing the man she loved. When the false bond finally shattered, she replaced it with truth, her love, her claim on him 4 years delayed but never diminished. Mine, her soul sang into his. My mate, my king. Mine. Yours, his soul answered back even through the haze of near death. Always yours, only yours. The light exploded outward one final time, then faded. Marin collapsed against Corvain's chest, utterly spent. But beneath her ear she heard something beautiful, his heart beating strong and steady, warm. "Marin," his voice was rough but clear. His hand came up to stroke her hair. "Marin, look at me." She raised her head. His eyes were open, clear of fog and frost. Color had returned to his cheeks. When he smiled, it was the smile she remembered from those stolen nights, warm and real and full of wonder. "You saved me," he said. "You found me first," she whispered back. He pulled her down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, she heard Bryony squeal with delight, heard Callum's quiet, finally heard Miriam's satisfied chuckle. And in the corner, bound and broken, Celine wept. They returned to Silver Peak 14 days later. The journey was nothing like Marin's desperate flight 4 years before. This time she traveled in a royal carriage, her children beside her, their father riding at the head of a procession that stretched back half a mile. Word had already spread. Messengers had raced ahead, carrying the truth. Celine's confession extracted before witnesses. Miriam's testimony supported by her carefully kept records. The guards' accounts of the Queen's attempted murder of the royal heirs. By the time they reached the capital, the people were already lining the streets, not to jeer, not to question, to celebrate. "The true Queen," someone shouted as Marin's carriage passed. An old woman, her face lined with years' tears streaming down her cheeks. "The true Queen has returned." The cry was taken up, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Thousands of voices chanting her name. Marin sat frozen in her seat, overwhelmed as the sound washed over her in waves. "Mama!" Bryony tugged at her sleeve, pressing her small face to the carriage window. "They're happy to see us." "They are, little one," Marin's voice caught. "They really are." Callum sat quietly beside his sister, watching everything with those two observant eyes. He had been subdued since the night of Celine's attack, processing, in his careful way, what it meant that someone had tried to hurt him and his sister. Marin reached over, pulling both children close. "You're safe now," she murmured into their ear. "I promise, you're safe." The procession wound through the city toward the palace. Those black stone towers that Marin had once called home, rising from the cliffs like the crown of some ancient giant. She had lived there for 19 years, invisible and unwanted. Now she was returning as something else entirely. As a queen. The thought still felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. But Corvain's hand reached through the carriage window, finding hers, grounding her in reality. He rode beside the carriage, refusing to be separated from his family even for the short journey through the city. "Almost there," he said softly. "Are you ready?" Marin looked at her children, at the city spreading below them, at the life she had never imagined could be hers. "No," she admitted, "but I'll do it anyway." The palace gates swung open. The procession entered the courtyard where 4 years ago Marin had watched Corvain choose Celine and felt her world end. Now that same courtyard was filled with nobles and courtiers, all of them bowing as her carriage passed. Celine was brought separately in a prison wagon with barred windows. She would face trial in 10 days once the evidence had been formally presented to the High Court. Until then, she was confined to the same dungeons that had once held her father. Lord Thorne had been arrested the day after Celine's capture. His gambling debts had been real, his desperation genuine. But that didn't excuse what he had allowed his daughter to do, what he had enabled through his silence and his greed. Marin would have to face him eventually, to confront the father who had imprisoned her mother, who had treated Marin herself as worthless her entire life. But not today. Today she had other concerns. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. Corvain dismounted, moving to open the door himself rather than waiting for servants. He lifted Bryony out first, then Callum, then extended his hand to Marin. She took it, let him help her down. And when her feet touched the courtyard stones, when she stood before the palace that had been her prison, she lifted her chin and walked through those doors like she had every right to be there. Because she did. The coronation took place 3 weeks later on the night of the full moon. The intervening time had been a blur of preparations and revelations. Marin had been moved into the Queen's chambers, a suite of rooms that still carried traces of Celine's occupation. She'd had everything stripped out and replaced. New furniture, new fabrics, new everything. She would not sleep in her sister's bed or wear her sister's crown. Callum and Bryony had their own rooms in the royal family's wing, though they rarely slept in them. Most nights they ended up in Marin's bed, one child on each side, their small bodies pressed against hers for comfort and reassurance. They were adjusting, but it was hard. The palace was overwhelming after the simplicity of Willowmere. Too many rooms, too many people, too many rules about where they could go and what they could touch. But the palace staff adored them. Cook kept a jar of honey cakes just for Bryony, who visited the kitchens daily. The stable master taught Callum to ride a gentle mare. The head gardener let them help plant flowers in the Queen's private garden. Slowly, carefully, they were finding their place. Marin spent hours each day with Corvain's advisors learning the intricacies of court politics and kingdom management. She sat in on council meetings, taking notes, asking questions that often cut straight to the heart of issues the nobles had been dancing around for years. She was not the queen they had expected, not refined or schooled in courtly manners, but she was fierce and intelligent and genuinely cared about the welfare of common people in a way most nobles never bothered with. The council learned quickly not to underestimate her. Celine's trial had been held 10 days after their arrival. The great hall packed with nobles and commoners alike, all of them eager to witness justice. The evidence was overwhelming. Miriam testified about the scent-mimicking potion presenting the vial and her records. The palace healer confirmed that she had indeed told Celine about Marin's pregnancy 4 years ago, after Celine paid her a substantial bribe. Guards testified to what they had witnessed the night before the original ceremony. And then there was Celine herself. She had tried to maintain her composure at first, sitting straight-backed in the defendant's chair, her face a mask of regal disdain. But as each piece of evidence mounted, as each witness spoke, that mask began to crack. When Corvain took the stand, describing in detail how he had known from the first months of marriage that something was wrong, Celine's composure finally shattered entirely. "I did it for our family," she shouted, surging to her feet. "Father was drowning in debt. We would have lost everything. I saved House Thorne. I did what I had to do. By drugging your sister." The High Judge's voice was cold. "By stealing her identity, by attempting to murder children. They had no right to exist." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Celine seemed to realize what she'd admitted, her face going white. But it was too late. The words were spoken, witnessed by hundreds. The High Court deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts: fraud against the crown, attempted regicide, attempted murder of royal heirs, conspiracy to commit treason. The penalty under law was death. But when the judge asked for Corvain's recommendation, he stood and addressed the court with the full weight of his authority. "Queen Celine committed terrible crimes," he said. "Crimes that destroyed lives and nearly destroyed the kingdom's succession. But executing her would make her a martyr to some, would create questions about whether justice was served or whether I simply wanted to be rid of an inconvenient wife." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I propose exile instead, to the island of Stormbreak, 2,000 miles across the sea. She will be stripped of all titles, all lands, all privileges, forbidden to ever return to Silver Peak on pain of immediate execution. Let her live out her days in isolation with nothing but her choices for company." There was a long silence. Then the High Judge nodded slowly. "The Crown's mercy is noted. The sentence is exile, to be carried out immediately." Celine was dragged from the hall screaming, not in fear but in rage. Rage that she had been caught, that her carefully constructed lies had crumbled, that the half-sister she'd tormented had won. Marin watched her go without speaking. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a deep, bone-weary relief that it was finally over. Lord Thorne's trial came 2 days later. Unlike his daughter, he showed no remorse. When Marin took the stand to describe what Miriam had told her about her mother, about Freya being forced into marriage and imprisoned while pregnant, Thorne laughed. "She was a witch," he said dismissively. "A moon-blessed vagrant I found wandering the woods. I offered her protection, marriage legitimacy, and she repaid me by trying to escape. She died because she was weak, not because of anything I did." The casual cruelty in his voice, the complete lack of recognition that Freya had been a person deserving of dignity and choice, made something cold settle in Marin's chest. "You imprisoned my mother," she said quietly. "You forced her into marriage under false pretenses. You kept her locked away when she was carrying your child. And when she died, bringing me into the world exhausted from using her magic to ensure I survived, you treated me like garbage for 19 years. She stood facing him fully. "You told me I was worthless, that I should be grateful for scraps from your table, that my very existence was a burden you bore out of questionable mercy." Lord Thorne met her gaze without flinching. "Celine was my true daughter. Everything I did for her. And look where that brought you both." Marin's voice was steady. "Your true daughter is being shipped to an island prison. Your house is forfeit, your titles stripped, and I am now your queen." She took a breath. "But I am not you. I will not let your hate poison me anymore. So I forgive you, Lord Thorne, not because you deserve it, not because you've earned it, but because I refuse to carry the weight of your cruelty for one more day." The courtroom was silent. Lord Thorne stared at her, seemingly unable to process what he was hearing. But forgiveness doesn't mean freedom from consequences, Marin continued. You will spend the rest of your life in prison for what you did to my mother, for imprisoning a moon-blessed woman, for causing her death through neglect and cruelty. That is justice, and it is final. The verdict was unanimous. Life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. As the guards led him away, Lord Thorne finally broke his silence. You'll never be a real queen, he spat. You're still just playing dress-up. Marin smiled. It was not a kind smile. Perhaps, but I have a crown and a kingdom and children who will inherit both. What do you have, father? He had no answer. The guards dragged him from the hall, and Marin never saw him again. The night before her coronation, Marin couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony of the Queen's chambers looking out over the city. Silver Peak spread below her, thousands of lights twinkling in the darkness. Her kingdom now. Her responsibility. The weight of it was terrifying. Footsteps behind her. Corvain emerged from the shadows, wrapping a cloak around her shoulders against the autumn chill. Nervous? He asked. Terrified. He stood beside her, his hand finding hers. They had been careful over the past weeks, rebuilding trust, relearning each other. There had been no repeat of that desperate kiss in Willowmere. They were taking it slowly, establishing a foundation before building anything more. But moments like this, standing together in comfortable silence, felt more intimate than anything physical could have been. You'll be a magnificent queen, Corvain said quietly. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know the court dances or the proper forms of address or which fork to use at formal dinners. Neither did I when I first became king. I was 23, thrust onto a throne while still grieving my father's death. I made 1,000 mistakes in the first year alone. He squeezed her hand, but I learned. And you will too, because being a good ruler isn't about knowing which fork to use. It's about caring what happens to the people in your kingdom. And you already have that. Marin leaned her head against his shoulder. I want to make changes, real changes. Laws protecting children born outside marriage. Schools for common children. Sanctuaries for women escaping dangerous situations. Then we'll make them, together. The nobles will fight me on everyone. Let them. Corvain's voice hardened. They've had their way for too long. It's time for something different. They stood in silence for a while, watching the city breathe beneath them. I saw her today, Marin said finally. Celine, they were loading her onto the ship. Did you speak to her? No, I just watched. She looked so small, standing there in chains. Not like the terrifying figure from my childhood at all. Just a woman who made terrible choices and is facing the consequences. Marin turned to look at Corvain. Do you think I'm cruel for agreeing to exile her? I think you're merciful. She tried to kill our children, Marin. No one would have questioned an execution. I know, but I keep thinking about what drove her to it. The pressure from our father, the desperation to save a family that was crumbling. It doesn't excuse what she did, but I understand it. That's what will make you a good queen, Corvain said. The ability to see the complexity in people, to understand that cruelty often comes from pain, even if that doesn't make it acceptable. He pulled her closer. But don't let that understanding make you doubt yourself. Celine made her choices. She could have come to me, honestly explained her family's situation. I would have helped. Instead, she chose deception and violence. Those consequences are hers to bear. Marin nodded against his shoulder. I keep wondering what happens to her now, on that island, alone for the rest of her life. She won't be entirely alone. There's a small community there, other exiles from various kingdoms. She'll have to work for her keep, grow her own food, build whatever life she can manage. It's not comfortable, but it's survival. Good. The word surprised Marin with its firmness. She deserves to know what it's like to have nothing, to have to earn every scrap of dignity. Maybe it will teach her something. Corvain pressed a kiss to her temple. Come to bed. Tomorrow's a big day. You need rest. They went inside together. The Queen's chambers felt less foreign now, more like a place that might eventually become home. Marin had filled them with small touches from Willowmere, pressed flowers from the cottage garden, a quilt Hetty had made, books she'd read to the children on quiet evenings. Callum and Bryony were already asleep in the massive bed tangled together in the center. They had insisted on sleeping with their mother tonight, sensing her nervousness about tomorrow. Corvain looked at them, his expression softening. They're remarkable. You did an incredible job raising them alone. I did my best, but they're going to need their father now too. Marin met his eyes. Can you be that for them? Not just a king, but a father. I want nothing more. His voice was thick with emotion. I've missed 4 years already. I won't miss another day. He kissed her goodnight at the door, soft and chaste and full of promise. Then he went to his own chambers, leaving Marin to settle into bed beside her sleeping children. She pulled them close, one on each side, feeling their small hearts beating against her. Tomorrow she would be crowned. Tomorrow she would stand before the kingdom as their queen. Tomorrow everything would change again. But tonight, in this moment, she was just a mother, holding her children, keeping them safe. And that was enough. The coronation took place in the great cathedral, the same place where Celine had stolen Marin's identity 4 years before. But tonight the cathedral blazed with 1,000 candles, silver and white, casting dancing shadows across the ancient stones. Every noble house in Silver Peak attended, every courtier and council member. And unlike most coronations, the cathedral doors were thrown open to common people as well. Farmers and merchants, blacksmiths and bakers, all of them crowding into the back of the cathedral to witness history. Marin walked down the aisle in a gown of midnight blue velvet, embroidered with silver thread that caught the candlelight and made her seem to glow. Her hair was swept up, adorned with small white flowers. She wore no jewels except for one piece, a simple pendant that had belonged to her mother, recovered from Lord Thorne's private vault after his arrest. Callum and Bryony walked behind her, dressed in miniature court clothes. Callum was solemn and perfect, every inch a young prince. Bryony waved to people in the crowd, making them smile despite the formality of the occasion. Corvain waited at the altar, dressed in formal black and silver. When Marin reached him, he extended his hand. She took it, and together they faced the high priest. The ceremony was traditional in most ways. Oaths sworn to protect the kingdom, to serve the people, to uphold justice and mercy. But when it came time for the crowning, Corvain did something unexpected. He lifted the crown from its velvet cushion himself. Not the same crown Celine had worn. That had been melted down, the gold and moonstones used to create something new, something that belonged only to Marin. Marin of Silver Peak, Corvain announced, his voice carrying through the vast space. My true mate, mother of my heirs, the woman I should have crowned 4 years ago. He placed the crown on her head. It was lighter than she expected, delicate bands of white gold set with moonstones that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Rise, my queen. Marin stood. The cathedral erupted in cheers, not polite applause, but genuine celebration. The sound of hundreds of people who had heard her story, who knew what she had survived, expressing their joy that she had finally received what should have been hers all along. She turned to face them, and the noise grew louder. In the front row, she saw Miriam, the old midwife, who had traveled all the way from Willowmere to witness this moment. The woman who had brought Marin into the world, who had saved Callum with moon-blessed light, who had kept the truth safe until the moment it was needed. Their eyes met across the distance. Miriam smiled, tears streaming down her weathered face, and placed her hand over her heart, a gesture of blessing. Marin felt her own eyes fill. This wasn't just a coronation. It was vindication. Proof that she had not just survived, but triumphed. The celebration feast that followed lasted until dawn. Nobles who had once looked through Marin as if she didn't exist now bowed and scraped and offered their congratulations. Some were sincere. Others were merely pragmatic, adjusting to the new reality of power. Marin accepted both with equal grace. But the moment she treasured most came late in the night, when the formal proceedings were over and people had relaxed into genuine enjoyment. A group of children from the city had been allowed into the palace for the first time ever. They stood in a corner of the great hall, eyes wide with wonder at the opulence around them. Bryony noticed them first. She tugged on Marin's skirt until her mother bent down. Mama, those children look scared. Can I go play with them? Marin glanced at Corvain, who nodded. Go ahead. Bryony ran over to the group of children, Callum following more slowly behind. Within minutes, they were all playing together. A princess and a prince and a handful of common children running through the great hall as if titles and crowns meant nothing at all. Watching them, Marin felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. This is what I want, she said to Corvain. A kingdom where children like them and children like I was have the same opportunities as those born to noble houses, where birth doesn't determine destiny. Then that's what we'll build, Corvain pulled her close, starting tomorrow. The memorial garden was completed on the first anniversary of Marin's coronation. She stood before the white marble statue of her mother, one hand resting on her swollen belly. 3 months pregnant with her third child, a daughter the royal healer had confirmed last week. The past year had been a whirlwind of change. The Inheritance Equality Act had passed, allowing children born outside marriage to inherit if acknowledged by their fathers. 3 schools had opened in the capital, offering free education to any child whose family couldn't afford the fees. and Freya's sanctuary now sheltered 20 women escaping dangerous situations. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Footsteps on the garden path made her turn. Corvain approached with Callum and Bryony running ahead. The children had grown so much over the past year. Callum was taller, his shoulders beginning to broaden. Bryony's wild energy remained unchanged, though she'd learned to channel it into sword practice with the weapons master. Mama? Bryony launched herself at Merrin, then stopped short, remembering to be careful of the baby. Sorry, I forgot. It's all right, sweetheart. Merrin pulled her close. The baby is well protected. Can we feel her kick? Callum asked. Merrin guided their small hands to her belly. Right on cue, the baby kicked. Both children gasped with delight. Corvain joined them, wrapping his arms around all three. There's something I want to show you, he said. We love you. He led them to plaques set into the garden walls, names engraved in silver, moon-blessed women throughout history whose gifts had been suppressed or stolen or lost. This garden will honor all of them, Corvain said. Women like your mother, Merrin. Women like your grandmother. Their light will never be forgotten. Bryony tugged on her father's hand. Can we plant flowers for Grandma Freya? That's exactly what I was hoping you'd want to do. They spent the afternoon planting moonflowers around the base of the statue, getting dirt under their nails, laughing when Bryony accidentally dumped water over Callum's head, working together to create something beautiful. As the sun began to set, they sat together on a bench facing the statue. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the garden. Mama, Callum asked, do you think Grandma Freya would be proud of us? Merrin pulled him close. I think she would be so proud she could hardly contain it. You're both everything I could have hoped for. Kind and brave and true. And the baby, Bryony patted Merrin's belly. Will she be proud of her too? Especially her. Because she's going to grow up in a world that's a little bit better than the one I was born into. And that's what Grandma Freya would have wanted most. Somewhere in the city below, the evening bells rang. In the sanctuary that bore Freya's name, women were sitting down to dinner, safe for the first time in years. In the schools scattered across the kingdom, children were learning to read, opening doors to futures their parents had never imagined possible. And in the palace gardens, a family sat together under the moon's blessing. A king who had nearly lost everything. A queen who had clawed her way back from nothing. Two children who represented the best of both their parents. And soon, a third child. Another life touched by moon-blessed magic. Another chance to make the world a little bit kinder. The journey had been long and painful and full of moments when giving up would have been easier. But they hadn't given up. They'd kept going, kept fighting, kept protecting the ones they loved. And in the end, they had won something far more precious than crowns or kingdoms. They had won each other.